Hey, good morning. Good to see you all. Then I'll just start with my first presentation. Um, it's in the context of 3D commerce, but I think it can also be applied in other areas. That's why I didn't put 3D commerce there. And it's called Three Major Pitfalls to Avoid when scaling up your enterprise 3D content pipeline. So it's all about scalable 3D content pipelines. And if you look at like enterprise setups, they're usually quite complex. Even if they start simple sometimes with like a simple demo, after a while, if you really want to make the most of your 3D content or digital twins, as some say, there are a lot of challenges because 3D data usually comes from many heterogeneous sources, like 3D scanning, CAD, DCC tools, and it goes to many different applications that run on different devices and so on. And so that's a quite complex setup that involves many complicated things that we have to do with the data, right? Like optimizing it, converting it, making sure the materials are right, and so on. And so the first pitfall in this context is building your workflow upon an initial demo. Second one is getting trapped in an end-to-end vendor login. And the third one is using unstandardized content and interfaces. And I want to just talk briefly about each of them. So the first one, the mistake, building your workflow upon a demo. To illustrate that, I put here something that is not very 3D commerce related, but I think it's a great example. So this is a medical imaging app, and it's actually from Wikipedia. If you want to look at it later, then there's a full 360 of like a baby in the womb. Looks a bit creepy because all skeletons. But like this kind of application is literally like something where people's lives depend on this, right? That this functions. And during my time at Siemens Corporate Research in Princeton, I had a chance to see how they develop medical imaging applications. And there's a research department. The research department uses very specific tools like scene graph builders, and there are people who are very smart and like know all about 3D imaging, and they craft these demo applications, they discuss them, they evaluate them with the product team, and guess what happens next? The whole code is basically abandoned, and the production team implements the whole thing from scratch with a very different methodology. And that's perfectly fine because you don't want that experimental research code to be the one that is used when your child's life depends on it. You want a very different methodology for development. And I think this is a great example. And in 3D commerce, it's not so life critical, I would say, if something doesn't look perfect on a homepage, but there's still a lot of money depending on that. And so there's a very different workflow for building a demo and a different purpose, right? Demos are meant to support informed decision-making, and they need to be done in a scrappy way and fast. Because what if you're deciding to not move on with the project? You don't want to waste a lot of money or time upfront. Very different purpose. If you go to production, you already made that decision, and then it's all about robustness and scalability of the process. It's very different. And not only the objectives are different, but also the cost dynamics. For a demo, it's perfectly okay if an artist spends like a week tweaking a 3D model. But when you go from one 3D model to 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, then it's actually a big problem if this takes a week per model, right? So very different cost dynamics. And finally, the skill set that is needed is also very different because the people, and that's leading back to the example with the Princeton departments, the people that are working on demos and that are really, really good at doing a demo are usually having different mindset, skill set, and tooling than the ones that are focused on building perfect production workflows. It's more like an automation and engineering mindset that is needed there, whereas the other one is more like an agency and getting things done fast mindset. And so you might require different suppliers for different jobs. And it's very important to keep in mind when building your enterprise workflow. So that agency that built you this demo in a week and that cost 10K might not be the perfect partner to build your scalable workflows for 10,000 efforts. And the other way around with the suppliers. And the other one that I wanted to talk about here, like the second one is getting trapped in end-to-end vendor login. So this is something that would happen at the next stage of growth usually. And when you already made the decision that you want to implement something at scale and you're choosing that partner as an enterprise to work with you, then if you look again like at this initial setup here that we looked at, you have different paths from source data to applications, right? And usually not all of them are needed right away. So in 3D commerce, maybe you end up having a B2B showroom, a floor planner, a web-based viewer, an AR application, and 5 other applications. But you start with one. So when you start with that one, the easiest thing to do is to say, okay, we have this one vendor that can do perfectly fine, like this workflow from, let's say, a 3D scan to this specific 3D viewer. Let's hire them for all of our 3D problems. And that might be a bit short-sighted because you're locking yourself not only out of other use cases, but also you're locking yourself in with that particular vendor. So that's something really important to keep in mind. Many vendors will offer this, an end-to-end workflow, and it's something that, like at first sight, is very convenient for a decision maker because you get something out of one hand and it kind of works, but this can be a problem later on. And then finally, going a step further, if you have chosen the right vendors and you know what applications you want to build, then it's all about how do I organize my content? How do I interface between these different applications, right? And that's when standards come in. And I chose another example here that's, again, not 3D commerce. So this is a power plant that we visualized at Khronos with electricity response, like EDF, like one of the biggest nuclear energy companies in the world and partly state-owned by the French government. And they have this massive project working with like power plants that they want to construct, run, and later disassemble. And the life cycle of such a plant can be like 100 years or more, right? It's like you start assembling it and it takes like 20 years maybe until it's assembled. Then you run it for like 80 or 100 years, and then you disassemble it for another 20 years. There is no way the people disassembling it will be the same ones that assemble it, and there's no way they're going to have the same context knowledge about what 3D format is being used for the BIM data, right? So what they're doing is they're working with X3D. Back in the days when this was done, glTF wasn't an ISO standard yet. So X3D was like literally, I think, the only ISO standard in 3D that was available out there. And the beauty of an ISO standard is you could print the spec on durable paper or like carve it in stone or so, right? And then you have like that text-based X3D content and you put that next to it in a safe, in a, I don't know, in a basement in Switzerland. And then in 100 years, you come back and you can read the 3D content of your power plant. And if you use the proprietary format, I mean, how old is FBX? It's like a standard, but how old is that, right? Like if you think in this time scale, it's not old. So standardization is very important when you want to build something that lasts. And of course, we have to always keep up to date with what's going on in the standards world. And that requires time and attention, but it's actually the only real alternative to use open standards if you want to interface between different content creation apps and apps that process the data. And so that's my summary. So to reiterate, like 3 major pitfalls that I see when you want to scale up your enterprise 3D content pipeline are, first of all, building workflows upon a demo. Don't do that. Do the demo, and then keep in mind that production is something completely different and requires a different approach. Don't get trapped in end-to-end vendor lock-in. Consider all your future applications and just mindfully choose what vendors have what job. And finally, build your pipelines on standardized content because that's the only way to make it durable and scalable. And with that, I'm thanking everyone for their attention, and I'm really open and looking forward to a question.